right. Thank you guys for joining us on the Pwn Free Hustle podcast, where we help entrepreneurs outsmart hackers so they can dominate the hustle. This is our first episode. Yay. And we're going to be talking about OSINT. It's not just a buzzword. It's actually a cyber threat. And so my name is Rob Sinex. None of you have heard of me before because this is the first podcast I've ever done. But I've been in kind of the field in cybercrime and cybersecurity for 20 plus odd years. A lot of different roles, including, being a technology leader and stuff like that. And I'm going to tell you this about me. I can OSINT my butt off. Like, I can do it, but I'm not nearly as good as this guy. So I spent a lot of time doing it in the fraud space. It's really a common thing you do just to kind of check up on business partners. I'm sure people have done it. It's not necessarily new, but there really is some good information that you can get from OSINT. And there's also things you got to be really careful of when you're posting about your company or your business, right? And so what we're going to talk about in this episode are some of those things that you may post online or something that is online about your business that could make it vulnerable to a cyber attack. So going to go ahead and get right into it. And going to introduce my guest, awesome guy, founder of Great Pike. It's a modern research and investigation company focusing on due diligence, risk mitigation, and open source intelligence. I really wish I had some like, I don't know, singing angels or something, like bringing him in because he's my first guest. And I'm really excited that he actually agreed to come on and talk with me about this. So David, thank you so much for coming. Really great having you here. So let's get right into it. All right. So first of all, can you explain what OSINT is? For those that are unfamiliar with the term. I mean, I think a lot of people just think of it as stuff on the internet that I can find. But I'm sure there's a lot more nuance to it than that.
Yeah, thanks, Rob, for having me. And yeah, that's a great point. When you say OSINT or people think of OSINT, they're thinking of Google searching, and that's kind of where a lot of people say that's where it stops. But that's not the case. It's a huge capability that is out there. So when you talk about open source intelligence or open source information, it's out there. It's all publicly available. So OSINT is actually taking all of that data that's out there in the public and moving it from the data at rest into something that's actionable and something that you can use for decision making. You can call it intelligence if you're in the government, or you can call that information if you're at a company or a corporation. But it's taking all that data out there. So we're talking about not just Google, not just internet, but magazines, social media posts, video streams, public records. There's people out there actually take pictures of ships and planes as they're flying around, geospatial data on maps. It's pretty much endless. So if it's out there, it's publicly available, meaning the public can purchase it or they can go out and get it. That would be considered open source data or open source information. So lots of endless amounts of data feeds and data out there that you can use when you're looking at open source intelligence.
So yeah, and that's interesting. And I think that's a great overview. And so the one question I always have, I've asked this from other people that are kind of OSINT people, right? But what's like the weirdest thing that you'd think that you could find out there that maybe you wouldn't expect or maybe you wouldn't think is valuable? Like the most kind of off the wall thing that you could think of?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are people that just are into tracking things. It's their hobby. And you will find some strange databases, data sets out there that are just unique, where people are tracking certain objects, tracking people, the number of dogs going into a park, number of bicycles riding by, things like that.
Yeah.
Unique things that most people have no interest in, but there's people out there that look at it. There's people out there that database it. And one day that could be useful. So there's a lot of unique data sets out there that we would all find pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think that I could see people using that. There's probably good reasons for that, right? If you want to figure out, hey, if I want a dog walking business, maybe you track the number of dogs that go in and out of a dog park. If you have that much time, maybe you probably should start a dog walking business. I don't know. So let me ask you this: how did you get involved in OSINT? So I know, like I said, I kind of did it as part of my responsibilities. So I was doing kind of business fraud investigations, and so I would say I was a hobbyist probably, but like somebody like you that's kind of expert level, that's done it for a long time at a really, kind of high important level. Like how did you get involved in that? Like what drew you to it? Was there anything about it that you just said, hey, I like this?
Yeah. So I was a big data nerd already, as a young person. So it just kind of like amped up the more I got into open source and OSINT. I really started way back. If you go back to 9/11, when I was working for the government, after 9/11, a lot of the government realized there's a bunch of this open source data that's floating around out there that nobody was looking at. And so we started looking at that, and we realized you could actually put together and bring all this information together, actually make something of it, something that's useful. So that kind of sparked my imagination of, maybe we need to do more of this. So we started looking at blogs and posts, all this stuff, and found out there's, just treasure trove of data out there, these golden nuggets that we were looking at. So that kind of spurred my interest. I, did a deep dive into open source and OSINT from back in 2001 to 2019. I was working on it. And at that time, back in like 2010, real quick example, during the Arab Spring, that was in Egypt. That was a big moment for open source and OSINT. We were actually watching on the ground, like the rallies that were taking place in Cairo, Egypt, on Twitter. Twitter came out in 2006, but 2010 was really starting to take off. But we were able to, just sitting in the United States on the internet, just watching the Twitter posts, monitor those movements around Cairo, those huge rallies that were taking place with the Arab Spring. It really opened up our eyes. And that's kind of when the bug kind of started, and I couldn't let it go. So that's when, that information was just invaluable. So I, looking at that and then looking forward to today, there's just so much more out there, and it really is helpful, not just to the government, but to companies and small businesses as well.
Yeah. So we get into the ways that it's helpful. And that's a really, dude, every time I talk to you, you have these interesting stories. I just love hearing them. It's good. So bringing it back to kind of our topic, right? It's cybersecurity. We're trying to help people understand the things that they may post online that can harm them, right? And so, it might be a little off script, but I do want to talk about, like, I want to get your opinion on this whole thing with like posting things on certain social media sites owned by certain like countries. I get a lot of it. Kind of my perception of it is like, you post stuff on it now, and later on when you're older and in a position of influence, like people can come back and maybe use that to drive decision making or do other things. Like there's a lot of talk about kind of TikTok and the new stuff that's coming out. Like, what are your thoughts on that? What is it that people should know about those things, even not just related to their business, but just in general, that should give them pause when they think about whether or not they're going to put something on there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, first of all, anything that goes online is permanent. Even though you go on your account, delete it, there are actually companies that are just scraping all of the data out there. They're taking it, they put it into a database, you're saving it forever. So those videos that you had in college, or those crazy things you're doing on Instagram and TikTok, you go back, now that you're CEO of a company, maybe you want to clean up your accounts a little bit. Those have probably been downloaded and saved somewhere into a database. So the internet you have to kind of think of it as a permanent resource or archive. I think that's important to remember, that it's not just a fire and forget and I'll be fine down the road. That's why I work with a lot of families too. I tell them, don't put pictures of your kids online, because down the road, those will be available to others, down years from, then into the future. So it's important to remember that. Also, I would say that it may not be one picture, but when you start to aggregate data from an open source perspective, you can start to paint this picture about a person, their persona, what they do, what they like, and that opens you up to risk. Opens you up to ransomware risk and vulnerabilities. So the more that you're putting out, the more you're kind of softening your cybersecurity vulnerabilities, in my opinion.
So yeah, and that's a good point, right? And so, I'm familiar with OSINT as it relates to cyber threat intelligence, right? So I've done a lot of that, and there's different ways to collect it. But one of the ways that I always found interesting, particularly now with all the tools that are out there, right? So you have these large scale scrapers. Data storage is so much cheaper. Now you have these AI tools that are, accessible, no code, low code type things.
Yeah.
Where you can really like grab a whole lot of this data and do a lot with it. And so, I know from a cyber, being kind of a defender, like that information is valuable in understanding whether or not there are specific threats about, against, one of the companies you're supposed to protect, or probably more relevant are things like applications that are widely used that could be under attack. So from that perspective, from the defender perspective, I understand that. But I think the nuance here, and what I talk to people that I work with a lot is really thinking about, it's not just posting like from a personal perspective, but even things that you put online as a company that may not be embarrassing or anything like that, they can have some implications as it relates to your cybersecurity posture as well.
Yeah, 100%. I've seen images of, people are at work, it's innocent pictures, they're posting online, and behind them is the whiteboard, and up there is like the Wi-Fi password. That's information that probably shouldn't be public, and it's just, simple things like that where it's harmless posting, but you aggregate that data together, you can start to build that picture.
So when we talk about like small businesses and entrepreneurs, I think a lot of people think, and I hear this a lot, as somebody that offers cybersecurity solutions, like, I'm too small, nobody cares about me. And so I think I'm thinking that probably applies when they think about what they post online, and maybe takes a little bit more of a risk, maybe a riskier approach to what they post. But is there something like about a business online that might surprise people that could be used to initiate a cyber attack? Like,
yeah, I mean, the more that is out there, the more ammo you're giving the criminal from a cybersecurity perspective in an attack, a ransomware attack, phishing attack, all those type of attacks that exist. From an OSINT perspective, less is better, in my opinion. If you don't really have to put it out there, then I wouldn't, because it's just opening up the door. And there's all kinds of information out there. It could be harmless things. It could be incidental spills, from architecture or data storage that you have. Could be employees sending emails that are not encrypted. There's a lot of different ways that the data, or your corporate data, or your company's data, can get exposed out there onto the web, outside of social media too. So all of those play a part, because the criminal is always 2 steps ahead. He or she's trying to find those vulnerabilities, right, aggregate them together, and then put that together to build some kind of picture to exploit, those chinks in the armor.
So yeah, and that's a good point. So we talk about like putting it out, like, so how would they use it, right? So it's one thing we talked about, kind of putting it up there and the risk of that. So how would they use it? Like, can you kind of expand on that and like take an example of a piece of data and then talk about how a cyber criminal, hacker, whatever you want to call them, might use that to kind of attack a vulnerable business?
Yeah, sure. So one example would be posting information about your company. That could be, on social media. It could be location information, when you're open, when there's employees there, when you're going on leave, or it's PTO and the entire company's out, there's no security available, things like that, those vulnerabilities. Also, if you're out there sharing publicly where your data is located, public clouds, things like that, all that is leading up to asking for some type of, type of attack or something like that. A lot of that data gets moved to the dark web and it's aggregated down there. But, the more you post, the more information that you're putting out there, again, all that's just adding to that, the big picture.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And you mentioned the dark web, right? And so I've done some research on the dark web for cybersecurity projects over the years. And so one of the things I see a lot is people advertising that they can go online and remove your data from the dark web. I kind of chuckle, like I had the same reaction you did. But can you talk a little bit about why that you really can't? Like, I mean, I know from my perspective, like, I don't know how you would ever do that, but like, could you just kind of maybe educate people on that? Because I think I do feel like some of those people are kind of getting scammed when they say that we can remove your data from because you can't really, can you?
No, it's going to be, once it's there, it's there. So the dark web is what you could say decentralized. It's not like your typical internet where there's controls and you can contact a company, or you can go to a web host and say, I need this data taken down. This is proprietary information, or HIPAA, it's not compliant. The web host will take it down, or you can contact, legal authorities or something like that. On the dark web, it's kind of like the Wild Wild West. It's no man's land. So if information is put on those sites, there's no really authority to control it. So it's just going to sit there. A lot of times it will be replicated Someone sees something that's unique, juicy, like a simple or easy attack. They're going to take that, they're going to move to their forums, and their friends and colleagues are going to, exploit that. So it's just going to replicate throughout the dark web. So it's not going to leave. Another interesting fact that's really, I found fascinating was 70% of the time, if a company or an entity is being mentioned on the dark web, there's a 70% chance of 70% of the time that there's going to be some type of ransomware or attack occurring within the next couple of months. So the dark web's a great indicator. You don't want your data down there, but if you do see data mentioned about your company or your institution or your employees, that's a red flag, to start preparing ahead of time. So found that fact pretty interesting.
So, and I'm not advocating for people just to hop on, and open up a Kali box and jump on Tor and start digging into the dark web, however you want to enter it. Because for most people, like if you don't understand what you're doing, you can really put yourself at risk. But, the vendors that are out there, are there some that kind of stand out in terms of being able to help you identify when like your data may be out there? And I know I see a lot of people and everybody has this credential search now, which again, I won't get into the details. Look, I'm a cynic when it comes to some of these things. So I find some of the claims around how valuable that information is to be somewhat dubious, not completely untrue, but I think it might be oversold a bit. But I do believe, and you're right. I mean, that data point, I didn't know that, which is really interesting. But in terms of vendors that are out there that do a really good job of being able to go out and actually collect information from the dark web, because on the OSINT side, people don't understand. You can't just for in any real context, most of the data on the dark web that's really going to be valuable is going to be sitting behind some kind of security, right? And usually it's not just you figuring out or answering a CAPTCHA, which those are pretty easy to deal with, but in some cases, like some of those forums, you actually have to do something. Like they might put out, say, hey, this company's got a file, I want it, go get it, prove that you're not like a cop or anything like that. And so I'm just curious, like when you get to that real stuff, there's a lot of valuable data in there. How do companies go about collecting that stuff, and what types of vendors out there that can really provide insight into your business that may have indicators out there on the dark web?
Yeah, there's a couple of companies, just to kind of go back a little bit to what you were saying. If a lot of those credit card companies and the small companies, some of them will say, "Oh, we can remove all your data from the dark web." You're correct; it's not true. I've never seen that happen before. They might be able to tell you where it's at, but they can't remove it. And again, like you're saying, just to piggyback, those forums are controlled by admins, and they vet every single person. And if you don't have the creds, and you speak to speak, you're not going to get in there to see the data. So you can't take it down. One company I've worked with in the past called Dark Owl, very good company at monitoring the dark web. They've been doing it for years and years. They're located in Colorado, but they are pretty much cutting edge when it comes to monitoring the dark web and knowing what's out there. They have all these algorithms that they built. So as these new forums pop up on the dark web, these new search engines, because there's hundreds and hundreds of search engines. It's not like Google on the open internet. There's hundreds of search engines that are being used. They're tracking those, and they're aggregating and downloading and scraping those as well. So they're trying to stay on top of it. So that's one company that can do some monitoring for your small business or your company. Then they give you alerts, if something pops up.
Yeah, that it's such a mess to kind of sort through that. And it's interesting in how it works. And I think a lot of people associate it with the criminal underworld, when in reality, it was really developed by, I think it was DARPA, wasn't it? Originally, it was a way for just to create secure communications. And, unfortunately, people took that and found, less than noble pursuits to kind of take it on. But that's really interesting. So, okay, bring this back up one level, right? So the dark web stuff, terribly interesting. But I want to get this back to kind of small businesses and really thinking about, like, I hear you. You're saying we're putting this stuff online. I get that it's a threat. What are some of the things that I can do to protect my business so that I'm not posting anything that could make me vulnerable? Like, what would you advise somebody?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And for the companies that I've worked with in the past, I think one of the big problems is education, is that the employees and the company don't actually think there's a threat there. that just think, I've got my company, I'm fine, no one's going to come after me, I'm a small business, and no one cares. But that's the complete opposite of reality. And I think awareness is a huge factor. So really making your employees in the company, the small business, everybody, it doesn't matter if they're in HR or they're on the front lines doing sales and BD work. Everyone should understand that there's a real threat and that it's happening 24/7, 365. These criminals, they've got cases of Red Bull. They're up all night going after these companies and going after everybody. They're not stopping. They're not slowing down. They don't care about, legal ramifications and getting in trouble. They're just on it. And now they're starting to utilize AI and all stuff. We'll talk about that maybe later. But so I think awareness is a big one. Training employees on what to look for, the threats that are out there, like phishing attacks, and if something doesn't look right, what do you do? Things like that. And then a lot of small business companies are still not using like two-factor authentication. They're using old email addresses from like domain providers. So what I mean by that is, let's say your website's being hosted by GoDaddy and you're relying on GoDaddy's email servers to run your company's email. I mean, completely unsecure. They don't have the right infrastructure to protect you from, exploits, malware, things like that. So I would say, use reputable systems, make sure the employees are completely aware of the threat that's out there, and then practice, go through scenarios where, send out, as a CEO of a company, send out a fake email that looks like malware and see what happens. Are they ready for that? Are they clicking on the links and then, they're unfortunately opening themselves up. So
and getting back to it, right? Just as with in the cybersecurity space, it's pretty common knowledge at this point that us as users are the weak link. Like, we're the ones that always cause the problem. When you look at anything, the last, I'm working on this part of my dissertation. So the last number I just saw that came out from last year is roughly, depending on how you define it, it's between 73 and 80% of all cyber attacks that are successful are because of us. We're dunderheads, right? And so when you think about it in the context of OSINT and all these people, the things that they can post online, as I think about it, like, I don't think I've ever seen training that covers like what I post online. It's really, they do talk a lot about phishing and how to, and we get those, like the corporate trainings and all the stuff. I'm wondering, I think that's probably really important. I mean, are there vendors out there that do this? I don't think I've ever had a training related to that, because as a small business owner, you're entrusting your employees and they're not doing anything intentionally, just like you don't. But it just takes one mistake to post something online that maybe shouldn't be there. And it could be it could be about a strategy or some sort of acquisition that you're planning, or really something that puts you at a competitive disadvantage. It doesn't just have to be a cyber thing. But are there training and resources available for small businesses that maybe they could share with their employees that talk about the threat of, what you post online and how that may impact the company?
Yeah, there are. That's a good point. I see LinkedIn is becoming a big issue lately. I think people understand not to take work stuff and put on Facebook usually, and TikTok and things like that. Well, LinkedIn, I would say that's a new wave of vulnerabilities popping up, because people want to brag. They want to put things on there about their companies and what they're doing and who they're talking to. And like I said before, as you aggregate all that data, it's starting to paint that picture of what you're up to, which could be a vulnerability. But one organization I like to go to is called SANS, the SANS Institute, SANS Institute. Yeah, you can go to their website, sansinstitute.org. They have a lot of information about OSINT and cybersecurity combined. So how those together, and looking at some best practices, OPSEC, which is operational security. What can you do to protect yourself from posting online, and no one's doing it on purpose. They're kind of just accidentally leaking out, little bits of information here, even if it's not something huge. Like you're saying, it can add up over time. It can add up. So
yeah, there was one, I've been trying to find this article again for this conversation tonight, but it was interesting, right? So there was a company, not a huge company, but they were looking at acquiring a competitor, and it was big enough they had their own plane. And so they were smart, right? They chartered a separate plane through a charter service instead of using their own plane to go to the place where their competitor was. And it was somewhere in Florida, it was like Boca Raton or something like that. And apparently when they got there, one of the assistants to one of the executives posted, chilling in Boca, hashtag work trip. And like, it kind of like they figured out where they worked and like all that stuff. And it's the funny thing is though, and that like, that's a true story. I gotta find the article because it's one of those things where you wouldn't think that would be like a problem, right? But in the competitive landscape, like if they know that, hey, you're on a work trip and you're from this company and you're in a town where your largest competitor is there, like something's about to go down, right? So it's just kind of those things where it's like these little things that people don't think about that can really have an impact.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's really helpful information. Do you recommend that, companies like, so this is the other thing, right? Especially in a small business where you have people that wear a lot of hats. You might have, one of your ops guys that helps post on Facebook to make sure that they can get like, do you have any best practices, or is there a list of best practices about how, you can allow your employees to kind of be advocates for your business, but do so in a way that's not going to put it at risk? Like, is there even a handbook for this, or does it make sense just to have like somebody managing your communications, even if you're a small company? It just seems impractical. But, when you're an entrepreneur, small business owner, like you're wearing a bunch of hats and you have people that you're working with and they're wearing a bunch of hats, signals get crossed. Like any advice for how to kind of manage that to make sure that things don't get lost in the shovel, inadvertently post something that maybe could put you at risk?
Yeah, I think that there should be policies. Even if it's a small company, just a few employees, there should be policies in place that really help the employees differentiate that I can post this or I can't post that, just to give them some left and right limits. There's also really cheap ways to monitor social media accounts. So not saying that you want to monitor every employee and what they're posting online, but there are, tools out there like Buzz Meltwater and Hootsuite and things like that. They're pretty cheap.
Yeah.
Some of them are even free, where you can just, throw in Twitter accounts, throw in Facebook accounts and things like that, and do searches for like your company name, hashtag your company name, maybe your location, things like that. And just to kind of have that awareness out there to make sure there's nothing inadvertently being leaked out. So I think taking an active role is the most important thing you can do, instead of just sitting back and just hoping nothing happens.
Yeah.
Taking an active role is key.
They call that the turtle strategy in business school, right? Keep your head in the shell and, hope it doesn't crack. That's kind of what you do. So when we talk about OSINT, and I know we're coming up on time here, but I appreciate you kind of hanging in there. So we talk about OSINT. One of the interesting things, right? So one of the things that I do with my business is around cybersecurity compliance. So helping businesses that have, there's any number of frameworks, name it. Like if you're in the government, it's DFARS, CMMC levels 1 through 3, FISMA, FedRAMP. You have, Pub 4812, which is IRS requirements. And then you have, SOC 2, and then you have CIS, NIST, like a whole bevy of controls out there, right? And so one of the things that I've noticed is that I don't think I've seen one that actually requires a, threat intelligence program to be part of it. I mean, there's a lot of awareness training, and I think that these control structures come a really long way. Like they've gotten pretty good at it. I would say some maybe take it a bit too extreme. Like, I do think we tend to forget in the cybersecurity space that the role of cybersecurity is to facilitate business, not shut it off. Because if you really want to be secure, the only 100% way to do that is to clip the cable, right? No more internet. This is obviously not practical. In today's business context. But, when you think about that, are there do you believe, I tell you, I believe that there should be, and it shouldn't be onerous, but there should be some level of cyber threat intelligence required as part of these frameworks to help make sure you're really doing everything you can to protect the information that you're holding and to keep your business running, right? Because it's the other thing that can happen. But I mean, what are your thoughts on, that as it relates to these frameworks?
Yeah, I totally agree 100% that knowing what's out there, knowing how to be reactive is not enough. You need to know what's going on the other side. What are they looking for? And then how to protect your company, how to protect your business. So more training. There should be additional awareness added to those 100%, and not just, I've secured my laptop. It should be what's out there. What are the threats? What are the threats to people? Not just, infrastructure, hardware, laptops, things like that. They don't really cover that too much, but, I could tell you a quick example of a story where the CEO probably should have had additional awareness or training. There was a company last year, some cyber security actors and some bad actors and criminals actually used AI. They took the voice of one of the employees at the company. They called the CEO with the voice and were able to have him wire transfer over $400,000 to an offshore account. So, I mean, if he had that training or the awareness, if that was part of the policy and the plan and part of the, statutes and, what the company should be following, maybe he would have been more aware of something to look out for. So I think that those should be included. It should be expanded out to cover, the threats that are out there.
Yeah, and I hear the people that will say, like, all right, if you look at NIST 853, I mean, if you look at the individual controls, there's over 1,000 of them, right? Yeah. So that's nuts. I mean, in most cases, when you're implementing 53, it's usually only parts and pieces of it that are relevant to certain things. But I tend to agree that, like, yeah, it is a cybersecurity issue. It is something that, at least in my mind, like, you need to consider. If you're a business that's worried about security, or if you're a cybersecurity professional that's, looking to figure out how you can keep the business that you're protecting safe. Like, I just think that's a really prudent thing to do. And you already touched on this. I could tell, like, you're kind of raring to go. I see the wheels turning to get to the AI portion of the discussion, because, look, it's just terribly interesting. AI is a big word, and I've kind of been around. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm this master AI practitioner, right? But, when you look at the different types and again, machine learning, and there will be some that will yell at me and say, oh, machine learning is not AI. And so, all right, whatever. But you get it. I mean, you have, computer vision, you have natural language processing, sentiment analysis. Like, there's all these different forms of AI. And you talked about kind of the voice replicator. And now you have things where you have generative AI, which means you basically just create something out of nothing. Even I saw one, there's somebody online advertising, like, you could create a twin, and just, like, put them up there, and they'll look like you and sound like you and talk. So anybody that's looking to get out of work for a day, just, like, put your AI twin up there. No, I'm not really advocating to do that, but it's interesting, like, how far this technology has come, and it's really, really growing. And so I'd really be interested in hearing your thoughts more about how, like, AI will impact OSINT, particularly in the context of cybersecurity.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It's going to be a huge problem in the future. I mean, it's a big problem today, but it's going to be even a bigger problem in the near future, because it's being used by both sides. So from an OSINT perspective, can AI protect the infrastructure, protect the company? Can it detect, malicious activity and, protect the infrastructure faster? Sure. But it's also being used by the criminals. So right. It's kind of like, as one gets better, the other one gets better. The old game of who's better, is it the criminal or the cops? And they're trying to outdo each other. But from an OSINT perspective, AI is being fully utilized by criminals when it comes to cyber and cybersecurity threats. That's from doing things faster. Now, when they go to look at, a company, and they want to find everything they can about a company to do the reconnaissance, or to start, digging in, what are those soft spots where you can attack? AI is helping them do that even faster. So now, it's not taking them a week to do on a team of 20 people. Now it's one dude running a bunch of algorithms that are going out and pulling everything in and then saying, is this a company that's at risk? Yes or no? So, I mean, we're getting to the level where it's happening, in near real time now.
Yeah. So, and this is something, look, one thing about cyber criminals, right, is they're early adopters. They're oftentimes the very first ones to pick up and use new technology. And you're right. I think a lot of the environment today, and this is like, I think a lot of things, when I start working with new clients, a lot of times they don't understand, like, maybe 15, 20 years ago, a cyber attack, there's a lot of effort that went into that. So there weren't nearly as many doors. Now you have like, work from home, you have IoT, which is a whole probably separate topic. We could just probably spend an hour on that, right? But you have all these different things out there that have created additional endpoints and created a lot of complications around security. And at the end of the day, like it just becomes a matter of chance. Like they've scaled their processes, not just from data collection, which is, the AI piece is relatively new, but even before that, they were using automation, and there's tools called like rootkits and other things like that, which are basically things that, could just proliferate throughout the box. And I think what's happening, and I did do a research paper on this. And so what I was finding, right, is that the number of really sophisticated actors that are actually hands-on in attacks is going down because they've realized, like, why put myself at risk when I can build a tool and sell that tool to somebody else? It's going to pay $3,000-$5,000 a hit for it. I don't have any risk at that point. Like, I'm not doing anything. And so that's where these rootkits come, and why you're seeing a lot more people offering zero-day exploits for sale. There's more zero-day exploits than there's ever been, at least from what I've seen. And so, like, you have that aspect of it, but now you throw AI on top of that, and you're just, essentially increasing the power to the point where there's no such thing as a target attack. Everything's chance. They're just throwing stuff out there, and to the point you made earlier, whatever they can bring back sticks. And then some of the really interesting things, like I've been, ransomware is kind of an interesting one. And so I follow a lot of developments in the malware world. And so you have these types of malware called polymorphic and metamorphic, and they're AI driven. And what polymorphic does is it basically, once it installs itself, it looks for any number of vulnerabilities. So it tries to find the vulnerability that you have, and it has an exploit for that. And so what it actually does is it just takes on essentially the form of that exploit and uses it. So it'll scan your computer and say, all right, these exploits exist. This is what I need to do. And so it shoots that out there. And it's really, really hard to combat because it can change. And then the other one, which is in some ways scarier, like if you know how, a virus scanner works. So there's these virus definition files, which are essentially just hash versions of the code based on malware samples that we've collected, right? And setting aside the fact that it usually takes anywhere from, it's gotten shorter, but usually between 3 and 9 months, depending on how quickly people react before that virus actually hits the definition file. But now you have this metamorphic malware out there that actually comes in, and what it does is every time it infects something, it changes its code just enough so that the hash value that the virus definition file will be different. And it does it every time. So when it goes to the next host, it changes it again, and then it changes. So it's basically, you can never stop it. And it's just like, they saw that with Stuxnet and some of these other things. Like there's probably all these things going around the internet right now that we just don't even know. Yeah. But there's actually been a lot of kind of live examples of this metamorphic and polymorphic malware, which is why, look, I'm not saying antivirus. Antivirus is good. You need to have antivirus. So you won't ever hear me say that. It's an important tool that's going to stop all the low-hanging fruit, right? But it's not enough, right? Incorporating things like monitoring for OSINT and things like that could put your company at risk. There's all kinds of other monitoring controls. You should definitely be using your firewalls and things like that. But the world we live in today with AI and how it's just impacted OSINT and malware, it's really, really important to kind of think about these things because it's only going to get worse. I mean, how long before we have just some master AI cyber criminal that just constantly kicks out attacks all the time? Like,
near real time.
If you would have asked me that 5 years ago, I'd have kind of looked at you funny. But now, like, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm a tinfoil hat guy and that won't happen. But it is something to think about, right? Because AI, it's a very powerful tool, and if we've seen before, like, you put powerful tools in the wrong hands, it usually doesn't end well. And so not to be doom and gloom, right? But because the good thing is, like, the good guys also have AI tools and they're using them. We just gotta keep pace, right? So that's great. All right, so we're getting towards the end here, and I think the one thing I really want to hear, because again, our goal here is for anybody that's listening out there, right? We want you to take one piece of something away from these discussions so that you can take it back to your business, apply it, and make you a little bit more secure. Is there like a single piece of advice you'd give to an entrepreneur that's maybe just starting out and you know what they're doing? They're collecting data, right? And it's out there. What type of advice would you give them about protecting themselves from OSINT threats?
Yeah, I would say, I guess I could roll a couple into the one, but staying proactive. Go out there and search your company, see what's out there online. Don't, it's easy to go on Google. There's a couple of Google hacks you can do, or Google dorking. One is like just typing in link, LINK, colon, and then your domain. See what sites are linking to your site. See what sites have collected information. Stay active, stay proactive, and go out there and look at what's going on. The second is don't be cheap. I've seen companies end up spending, $10, $20, $100,000 because they ended up buying a $29 antivirus, thought that was going to protect the whole company, and come to find out if they would have actually hired a real cybersecurity company to support them and monitor and watch what's out there in their digital footprint that's online, they could have avoided all that and not had regrets about being poor. Yeah. When it comes to imploding. So I would say don't be cheap when it comes to cybersecurity. It's a real threat. It's a huge threat, and not to just buy the $29.95 off the shelf and expect everything to be okay. And then the last thing is I know this is more than one, but this is three. The last thing is training, just to make sure that you're constantly staying up to date with what's out there. And all the employees should be aware. The board of directors, if you have any, should be aware of all the threats that are out there. It doesn't have to be in-depth courses and things like that where they're going to classes and stuff. Just awareness is going to help. So I think just taking that proactive stance, like we were talking about earlier, is going to put you one step ahead of the bad guys. So.
Yeah, that's great advice. And again, David, thank you so much for doing this. It's I've known David for 4 years. Been awesome, really great guy. As I've said, really appreciate you coming on and all the really kind of thoughtful advice and insight you've given us. You want to talk a little bit about where people can reach you and some of the things that you do to kind of help in the OSINT space, real quick?
Sure.
So
I'll do the shameless plug.
Yeah. Shameless plug. All right, go ahead. I had to do the quotes first, so
you have to. You can reach me at our website's greypike.com, GRUY Pike, PIKE.com. So we really focus on threat mitigation and doing that deep dive research that might be a little bit more difficult for some to do. You just don't have the tools or the expertise. We can get down into the weeds when it comes to the data that's out there online from an open source perspective. If you're looking at due diligence, you're looking at people that you're working with, other companies, you may wonder, are these companies I actually want to work with? Are they reputable? Are they trustworthy? Is there a risk there? We help you vet those companies, things like that. So you can find all the information on the website, but happy to help anytime, especially small companies. We're a small company as well. So we really like to work with them, make sure that their cybersecurity is ready to go.
Yeah, awesome. Well, again, David, thank you so much for joining us. It really it was a great discussion. We'll have to have you back on again. Yep. I'm sure there's some other things we could kind of chop it up about, right?
Bunch of topics.
Yeah, for the rest of you, our next episode is going to be on CMMC. So if you're an aspiring defense contractor that has the next greatest widget to support our national security, definitely kind of stay tuned. We're going to talk a lot about CMMC and the impact that it's having and some of the things that you need to know to make sure that you're ready. CMMC, it's legit now after about 5 years of 5 levels to 3 levels to 5 levels to 3 PAOs to self-assessment. It's finally here. It's like Christmas, and so now it's really time for people to start buckling down. The good news is I feel like they landed in a good spot with it. I think it takes into account the fact that smaller businesses may struggle to meet some of the requirements. I think they've done a really good job in meting that out. But we're going to talk a lot more about that in our next episode. And again, David, thank you for joining us. Everybody else, thank you for listening. If you made it this far, that's awesome. Appreciate it. And please subscribe and hear more content like this. And we'll see you again next time. Thanks, guys.